Begin. Again, welcome all of you to the Alliance Center's Regenerative Recovery Coalition, all coalition team meeting today. My name is Lisa Marie Main, and I am your MC/facilitator for today. I'm passionate about our collective mission and so happy that you're here to join us. So I'd like to cover just a few things of what we're going to do. In that, we're going to start with a very meaningful opening. Shakaya is going to lead us in. And we're going to hear from Catherine Greener from Greener Solutions. She's also a board member of the Alliance Center, and from Brenna Simmons St. Onge as well. Then most of our time, we're going to experience a very interactive and meaningful conversation that Ian Silveri is going to facilitate with our representative, Dominique Jackson. We're so excited that she's here today to share her wisdom and insights and partner with us as we take action in moving forward. As you know, we also hosted many emergent series conversations last year that resulted in working group teams. So we're going to hear some updates from the working group leaders today, and you'll be invited to participate should you wish to take some action. And then we'll hear some concluding remarks from Hunter Lovins, and she'll tell us more about how we can all get involved. And as I mentioned, we'll have an optional happy hour at the end. Stay together, enjoy conversation, networking, and if you'd like to go into an optional breakout to have a smaller group conversation, you can. So at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce Shakai Sinclair, who's going to lead us in a meaningful meeting opener.
Thank you, Lisa Marie. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be sharing two acknowledgements that our Equity, Access, and Democracy Working Group say before each of our meetings. And I want to put it forward as a proposal that we do this at all of our meetings. So as Coloradans, we stand on the unceded ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other indigenous tribes. We recognize the indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have brought us to our current moment. We also want to take a moment to honor our families, friends, neighbors, and community members in Colorado and across the world who've lost their well-being and lives during COVID-19, particularly those who did so as a result of inequities. Let's have a moment of silence to give space to remember and reflect on those impacted. If you need to turn off your camera and mic to fully experience this moment, please do so. All right, thank you, everyone.
Shakai, thank you so much. It's so important for an organization with a mission like the Alliance Center and our collective mission with the Recovery Coalition to know that we wouldn't be who and what we are today without those who have come before us. So thank you. Thank you. So now I'd like to introduce Catherine Greener. She is a board member of the Alliance Center and owner of Greener Solutions, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the state of the coalition. Catherine?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Shokai, for such a meaningful way to open up our meeting. Good afternoon. As Lisa said, I, along with Hunter Lovins, lead the Regenerative Recovery Coalition. And I really want to thank you for attending today, and I'm super excited for our meeting as we focus on an important regenerative fundamental, the impact of Colorado's legislative role, and also more importantly, our contribution from a civic responsibility, as well as the coalition's working groups. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Regenerative Recovery Coalition. We are a project of the Alliance Center, and we represent, just to name a few, entrepreneurs, elected officials, vast array of businesses, organizations, nonprofits, and individuals who share a vision of the future that is not just less bad or a better normal, but we are a group who believe that we can emerge from this pandemic and challenging times with a Colorado economy that works for all of us and that does not repress, pollute, or destroy the vast and beautiful resources of our state. This pandemic has illuminated the stark inequalities that Coloradans of color and those in underserved communities face. Yet we believe we have an obligation to do right by each other and to prevent further devastation. So working on a regenerative recovery really covers a wide swath of topics, but we recognize that as a system, they're all connected. So our list of work includes, but it's not limited to, working towards stopping climate change and man-made disasters it causes, eliminating environmental injustices, rapid transition to clean and renewable energy, creating good paying jobs that are local and provide upward mobility, economic development through better recycling and waste management practices, accelerating the adoption of soil restoration and regenerative agriculture practices, and supporting the expansion of food systems that provide nourishment for the underserved communities. And all of this while demonstrating that equity must be at the core of a regenerative economy. And we know, we've been told this is a super tall order, but we also know that we can't go back. And as a coalition, we will build Colorado forward. Those of you like me who love statistics, I'm going to give you a few. The coalition aims to represent the diversity of the state, and since our official launch in November, we have 134 different organizations employing approximately 21,000 Coloradans with approximately 2.8 B, yes, B with a billion in annual revenue, with an additional 113 individuals participating with us. Our priority is to amplify our members' work and the policies, projects, and actions that will rebuild Colorado's economy to be resilient to the future challenges, including a growing population, water insecurity, and climate change. And thank you to each and every one of you for sharing the vision and contributions of time and your voices to this work. And thanks to all of you, we've been super busy. We've launched initial working groups, which you're going to hear from later, that we have testified, we've met with government officials, we've helped each other's causes and issues, we've learned what's happening in the state, both good and bad, and we've spoken up and we've spoken out. And we will continue to have a voice through our newsletters, blogs, etc. And stay tuned, as the coalition grows, we're going to be launching more working groups in the near future. So we know it takes courage to reinvent everything, and that's really what this work is. We know that as Coloradans, as we recover from the pandemic, that we can and will create the future that we want. And as a coalition, we have an opportunity to coordinate the activities, amplify our members' work, support our civic responsibilities, and accelerate the transition to regenerative recovery, making our state stronger and more inclusive. So pulling a quote from Governor Polis's State of the State speech, and one of my personal favorite quotes from the explorer, adventurer, and philosopher, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, "Things are only impossible until they're not." So thank you for being part of building Colorado forward. And with that, it is my deep pleasure and honor to introduce Brenna Simmons-Salange, the Executive Director of the Alliance Center.
Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciate that. And thank all of you for joining us, not only today, but on this long and important journey ahead. I see so many familiar names in the chat box, and it's wonderful to be with you all again. I am just now back from 17 glorious weeks on maternity leave, and I can't thank Hunter and Catherine enough for their leadership, not only over the past year, but especially over the last 4 months as I got to spend time with my little bundle of joy. So thank you both. I have to say it's great to be back, and I'm really thrilled to spend the afternoon with all of you and have a chance to share just a bit more about the Alliance Center. So the Alliance Center was founded in 2004, and it's really a demonstration site for sustainability in action through our high performance building, which is LEED Platinum certified, and it's housed in the center of downtown Denver, where it's a convening space, a gathering space, a workspace for the state's leading sustainability organizations. And the Alliance really is a leader in green buildings. And we're currently exploring the most practical ways to maximize human health with environmental efficiency. And that's particularly important as we collectively navigate what it means to live and work in these pandemic times. And warning, shameless plug, if any of you find people need office or event space, we do have occupancy, so please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to have you join us. The Alliance's impact actually extends beyond our building, and we are lead conveners, and we mobilize change agents across our vast network to really accelerate solutions at the intersection of environmental, economic, and community well-being. For the past 16 years or so, we've been a leading convener of change agents from business, academia, nonprofit, media, community leaders, all working together to address some of the largest problems we face. And I think really earning us the title as the hub of sustainability in Colorado. So I love the Alliance. I could rattle on all day about it, but that's not what we're here to do. So I just want to leave you with one last important message about the Alliance, is that we exist to bring people together to solve systemic problems. And that's why we're here today. That's why this coalition exists. And so I thank each and every one of you for your passion and for joining us today. One of the main levers that we have for change, and the one that we'll be exploring today, is policy. And with that, it's really my great pleasure to introduce to you Representative Dominique Jackson, who has an extensive history of serving communities in both Aurora and Denver. And Representative Jackson represents House District 42, which is Aurora, Colorado. And to be honest, she serves on more committees than I can remember. So I'm just going to name a few. She is on the member of the Energy and Environment Committee, Health and Health Insurance Committee, the Legislative Council Committee, the Executive Committee of the Energy Council, and the Colorado Workforce Development Council, among others that are state-based. And then at the national level, she's actually the state lead for the National Conference of Environmental Legislators. She's a member of the Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee, the Health and Human Services Committee, and as if that wasn't enough, she also sits on the Energy Committee for U.S.-Canada relations. Representative Jackson, thank you so much for your leadership. We're truly honored to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you. I am very, very thrilled to be here today. I'm really excited. This is the coolest group of people. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's an honor to have you, and thank you again for your leadership. Representative Jackson will be in conversation with none other than Ian Silveri. And Ian actually began his career in Colorado politics back in 2008 as a legislative aide, to the Colorado House of Representatives. Since then, Ian has worked in dozens of successful campaigns in Colorado with the House Majority Project. And he actually was the executive director of that during the 2014 election cycle. Ian has also served on the Colorado House of Democratic Caucus since 2010 in a variety of press, policy, and eventually leadership roles, I believe even up to the chief of staff. So Ian is currently the outgoing executive director of Progress Now, and he will lead us through a riveting conversation with Representative Jackson about this year's legislative cycle and how the Regenerative Recovery Coalition can best engage to really help build Colorado forward, to build back stronger and better. So as we go forward today, I encourage you all to put questions and comments into the chat feature, and we'll be watching those to really help elevate your voices in the question and answer section that will come after Ian and Representative Jackson's conversation. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ian. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Brenna, once again, for inviting us and for facilitating this conversation, for the very generous introduction. Representative Jackson, it's so good to see you in this virtual setting. I look forward to when we can once again say hi in person. But until then, we are fortunate to be able to have so many people to chat with today or in front of about some of the really important work you're doing at the state capitol. So let's just jump right into it. The first question I've got for you is, So you were the lead sponsor of House Bill 1261 in 2019, which was called the Climate Action Plan. It's a series of goals set for the state of Colorado to actually reduce our carbon emissions and put some real meat on the bones of climate justice and environmental work. You also were the lead sponsor of House Bill 1143 last year in 2020, which increased fines on air and water quality violations in Colorado. Would you mind telling us a little bit about each of those bills, the history, and how the implementations are going?
Sure. So I guess we'll start with the last one first. So the bill that increased fines for air and water quality pollution actually was a much bigger bill when it started. And then the legislative session, we all had to leave because of COVID. And so I actually squished several bills that I was working on, environmental bills, into that bill. But it also meant I had to take some pieces out. I had to take out anything that created new programs because it was going to cost money. And we knew with COVID, we were now going to have a $3 billion budget shortfall as opposed to more money. So what the bill ended up doing, polluters were not paying fines and fees for polluting in communities. And of course, we're mostly talking about BIPOC communities here, right? Disproportionately impacted communities, low income communities, and they were cutting deals. And they were cutting deals with, our state agencies, because quite frankly, that's all of the authority our state agencies had to do at that time. Now they have more, thanks to this bill passing. But so they were cutting deals that didn't give back to these communities, right? So I heard of one, and I heard of this through our state agency. One of our state agencies was, there's a refinery in the Elyria Swansea neighborhood, and so, sure, they forked over some money, but one of the other things they were going to do was like, hey, we'll give people electric lawnmowers. Cool, right? Does not give back to that community. And who got the electric lawnmowers? I don't know, but nobody in that community. So, so this bill actually increases the fines, right, to what's the federal level, which was way more than what we could do here in the state. And that money is going back into those communities. So the other one, the Climate Action Plan to Reduce Pollution. So, it had some, a framework for some emissions goals, certain timelines, in order for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, right? And so the idea behind it was to sort of create this ladder, the outsides, I guess, of the ladder, right? And then give the Air Quality Control Commission sort of the authority to put the rungs in to figure out how we are going to get to these goals. And of course, it also mandated that DI communities, environmental justice communities, be a part of the process and the outcome of the policy. Well, the unfortunate fact of the matter is, this was a couple of years ago, right? So the unfortunate fact of the matter is that it's just really not happening. And so spent this entire summer, fall, winter, testifying at the AQCC, communities testifying, other lawmakers are testifying, hey, we did this, hey, we really need you to do what we asked you to do. And so we're seeking some, real, actionable, measurable goals that are equitable. And so we're probably going to be running some more legislation.
So thank you so much. Can you elaborate a little bit on what enhancements need to be made now that, policymaking is this incremental process where you have these great ideas and these big things, and sometimes they get whittled down, and sometimes a global pandemic happens, you have to cram a bunch of stuff into a different bill. And sometimes the ideas that you put forward in law end up quite different in implementation. So year after year, you have to come back and do additions, subtractions, or edits. What's on the plate to ensure that the goals of the Climate Action Plan are actually meeting those equity goals as well?
Well, so So when we did 1261, the governor, to his credit, um, put together a roadmap, right? And it's all online. You guys can read it, right? And it has different sectors, transportation, buildings, etc., that contribute to greenhouse gas pollution. Pardon me, and ideas on how we can reduce those emissions, right? But like I said before, I mean, it's our intent when we passed this bill was to make sure that this stuff really happens. So we can't just aspire to do this. We can't just say, "Hey, we really want to do this. We don't know how to," you know. So we're thinking about and running a bill. It'll start in the Senate. And we're still working on it. And my incredible colleague, Senator Faith Winter, is on the is my colleague in the Senate. To make sure that we are not just talking about things we'd like to do, that we codify what needs to be done and when.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to manage a little bit of the chat going on here too.
Oh, I
So
can't
this
see
is
the
really
chat.
helpful. No worries, I got you. Switching gears a tiny little bit, knowing that, having been a Capitol staffer myself, there's an army gauntlet of lobbyists and special interests and big corporations that hire all sorts of people to get in your way when you're down there trying to make things better for folks. If you could just wave your hands and pass any policy without having to go through that gauntlet or the other, legislators who are afraid for their next re-elections or whatever, and just make something in your brain a law right now, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Okay, Ian, I can't think of one individual thing. But I mean, I can talk to you about, sure, climate stuff is sometimes hard to do, but there's an economic impact to climate that everybody can pretty much see to
Sure.
a degree, right? One thing, and I'm working on 2 bills this session. Actually, I just passed one today.
Congrats.
But, yay! But then I have another one next week. And these are the most difficult bills for me to do. They're emotionally draining and they're really hard. And when you talk about the lobby, are housing bills. I believe that housing is a human right and that everyone deserves access to safe and affordable housing. And I mean, we could just go on and on about the impacts of not having housing. Would you like to be out there today without a safe place to live, a warm place to live? So, and I believe I'm a fair and equitable lawmaker. I don't think that there's just, oh, you're the bad guys all the time, no matter what industry you're in, right? But I'm trying, as it relates to housing, to sort of balance the scales of justice, as it were, and create, BIPOC communities. We don't have the generational wealth to own a lot of property, right? So I'd love to see us own more property, and I think, that housing stability creates better communities, stronger communities. You can't study if you don't have any place to sleep. Health equity issues. I mean, it's just massive. So, housing, for whatever reasons, housing policy is just really hard to pass, and it's stressful and it's emotional.
And it's something that a lot of folks end up taking for granted. And we've seen that through the pandemic, requests for affordable housing have gone through the roof. Food banks, diapers, just basic necessities of life have escaped a lot of folks, and obviously disproportionately impacting people of color and in communities that are already marginalized and already structurally disadvantaged. So Linda Stop has a question. I'm hoping one of our moderators with the power to unmute her will do so. Linda, I think your mic is working now. Would you like to pop in and ask Rep. Jackson a question?
Hi, Representative Jackson. Thank you so much. I can see your passion and enthusiasm for utilizing the systems of our legislative branch and trying to make some social change. And I truly agree with you that for me, it's health is a human right, and part of health is healthy housing. So, absolute, my dear, absolutely. But I'm going to try to shake up a little bit what's going on here, because I want to see some real reaction. So, Rep. Jackson, how does legislation and these systemic mechanisms to put policies into large books really make change for people who are disengaged, preoccupied with basic needs, or maybe with buying some consumer good because that's all they hear that they're supposed to be doing, or do not know how to work in these systems and don't have time? How does this work for them?
I really appreciate that question. So this is not, I mean, this is real. I ran for office because, I'm just like my neighbors, right? And I had the same problems as anybody else. But I knew how to find answers. And I also understood that my neighbors are working 2 jobs. I pray if they still have their job. Taking care of their kids, doing all the things, and life just freaking comes at you. Da 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 da, all this stuff. And you don't know where to go, and you don't know what to do, and you don't know how to find answers, and you can't advocate for yourself, right? So hopefully, most lawmakers, and I would say most lawmakers in that building go there because of their lived experiences, right? Because they are like other people and they listen to their neighbors. And guys, so for me anyway, the majority of bills I do come from community, right? When I have stakeholder meetings, and especially now that they're all remote, it's like there's a gazillion people on there who are regular people, right? Talking about what they need, and we build policy together. That building, that capital belongs to each and every one of you. And whatever issue is affecting your life, lawmakers listen to constituents, right? For lots of reasons, partially because they care and have a heart and a soul, partially because they want to get reelected. You have the power. All of the power truly rests within you. So, yes, you can't physically necessarily go into that building right now, but you can. It's a public building. It belongs to you. You can testify in any committee on any bill remotely right now at any time, right? And I think I don't know the website, Ian probably knows, it's like, if you just Google Colorado legislature, it tells you how to do all of this. It shows you every bill. It shows you every committee. You have every right to go in there or to testify remotely, right? On any single bill, no matter your position, you agree with it or disagree with it. You also should contact every single lawmaker that you want to talk to about anything. Citizens lobbying is powerful. Yeah, there's a lot of paid lobbyists in there, but guess who really makes a difference? It's regular people. When they come knocking on my door or call me or email me, that's what really makes a difference. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Rep. Jackson. That's incredibly powerful. And I think great instructions. As a person who was a staffer in the building, I can echo that. Oftentimes, lobbyists will try and corner lawmakers or make it seem like they're bigger and more important and scarier and more powerful than they truly are. But an overwhelming amount of feedback, contact, and advocacy from community can overwhelm that and beat that every time. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the policy portion of this Regenerative Recovery Coalition, because there are 100 of us on this call today. If we all contact all the lawmakers that are about to vote on one of Rep. Jackson's measures, the chances that it ends up going through go up quite a bit. Switching gears back to a little bit of wonkiness, if you don't mind. So we were talking a little bit about environmental justice. I want to dig in on that some further. A study came out last week from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment that we spit out as CDPHE, that showed the kind of air pollution that communities of color in Colorado disproportionately face. You spoke about Elyria and Swansea earlier, communities near the Suncor refinery, is linked directly to higher instances of COVID-19, as well as worse health outcomes for those afflicted with the virus. What can Colorado do to focus more resources in our recovery on fighting the dual scourges that worsen each other of environmental and health systems racism?
Wow. So, BIPOC communities are understandably wary of the medical community sometimes, and particularly vaccines. I mean, there is racist history in my lifetime, right? The Tuskegee experiment comes to mind, right?
Of course.
So we need to use every means possible to help community to understand that these vaccines save lives. So we've had town halls. The governor's been on a lot. The governor's office has been very helpful. We've had lots of pop-up clinics in my community. I was at one at an Ethiopian church a couple of weeks ago, and that's sort of what it takes. It takes clergy, lawmakers. The town hall we did, we had a bunch of Black doctors, which quite frankly, we need a whole lot more Black doctors, mental health professionals, folks like that. And we need that because, and not just Black, brown, indigenous, we need people of color to be in these roles so that we have somebody who sees the world like we do, who we can talk to and trust and know that they experience things in the same way. So, and then that helps us as it relates to not just information, but access and affordability. So I think that those are ways that we can break through.
That's super helpful. And this is just yet another reason why representation matters so much, right? I mean, like the ability for community to feel heard, feel represented, feel safe, to be able to engage with their government, to engage with healthcare systems. If they're not represented, there's a very good reason why they would be skeptical of it. Additionally, this is why representation in government matters. And Colorado, fortunately, has one of the most diverse legislatures in the country. We have the second largest number of women by percentage in office in Colorado than any other state in the country, working on making that number one. And it's in great thanks in part to folks like you who run for office, which is not easy. You have to get out there, you have to knock on doors, you have to put yourself out there, subject yourself to all sorts of horrible, nasty political garbage. So we're extremely grateful for your leadership and for being in a place like Colorado that has long led the country in diversity and representation in government. Shannon has a question in the chat that I think actually hits on these themes quite a bit. She says, being the voice of many is a balancing act of dancing around tensions. Rep. Jackson, what would you share with folks on the call here who are new to the work of representing other people than themselves? How do you stay balanced and focused when so many have incentives to pull you in so many different directions?
Okay, I apologize. I looked at my phone for a minute. I got a text. Ian, can you say it briefly one more time?
I am so glad you asked. I'm happy to do that. And trust me, we know Rep. Jackson's actually also like in committee at the moment. So like we are very grateful for your time here. The long and short of the question here is, how do you stay focused on representing your constituencies when so many people with so many other interests are trying to pull you in a billion different directions?
Well, I mean, I think that so first let me say, I'm a Coloradan. I care about everybody in every corner of this state, right? When I knock on doors and I'm talking to somebody of a different party and they're just like, hey, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, I represent you too. I represent people, right? So I lead This is me. I lead with love. I lead from my heart. I lead from my values. I lead that from a space of the greater good, treating people fairly, right? And so when it comes down to making decisions, it's not that hard because because you have a moral compass.
Right.
You know what's the right thing to do. So it's just the details. It's just the nitty-gritty of stuff, the minutia of legislation. But the big overall picture of being pulled in lots of different directions, you know where to go. You know where you stand.
So I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And it's interesting that you say at the end of the day, it's actually relatively simple because you know what you believe, you know what you stand for, and you're down there. And regardless of what kind of pressure comes your way, regardless of what kind of lobbying power comes your way, at the end of the day, you're the one with the vote. It is you, one legislator out of 65 in the House. There are 35 senators in the Colorado Senate, and you have more power than any one of those folks. And if you're truly representing your constituents in your community, there's nothing they can do to distract you, essentially. Thank you so much. I want to keep going down the line here. So Colorado is this wonderful, special place. We're this little rectangle in this interesting political part of the country. And almost on all sides, we're surrounded by states who have yet to take bold stances on climate, many of whose leaders are actually deniers of anthropomorphic climate change, of human-caused climate change. So you're taking all sorts of bold stances. We have a renewable energy portfolio standard. We have a plan to reduce carbon emissions over years, but air pollution and climate change doesn't care about state boundaries. So what does it matter if we're bold and aggressive, but our neighbors don't do anything, or even worse, start to deregulate their energy production and transmission systems even further?
So Colorado has always been a leader. And the way it works, I mean, lawmakers talk to each other from other states, right? And since Colorado has always been a leader, lawmakers from other states actually look to us and are like, hey, I heard about this. How'd you guys do that? Maybe we're going to try that over here. The Climate Action Plan to Reduce Pollution isn't a perfect example. But yes, there are people with different ideas about, say, climate, for instance. But the fact of the matter is, when things go bad, I've talked about how you all have the power as citizens, as business owners, as individuals. When things go bad, hello, Texas. Hello,
Right.
What just happened? Hello. Right. There's an outrage, and things change.
Well, so let's dig into the Texas situation a little bit. So I was actually feeling rather ill last week. I went and got a COVID test.
Let's dig into it. Let's shovel it out.
Yeah, let's help our friends in Texas with their new snow problem. I was feeling rather ill last week. I went and got a COVID test, and I don't know the results yet because they sent it to Houston. But we saw what happened with their winter storms, and folks are still trying to recover from that catastrophe that the lack of planning and deregulation of systems combined with the consequences of a really severe storm. This was definitely a failure in hardening the electrical grid. Senator Chris Hansen actually put an op-ed in the Denver Post this week about the hardness of our electricity grid. I encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't read it yet. It's really interesting. But leaders and industry partisans have since embarked on a campaign of disinformation, talking about how windmills were the problem in Texas, when in reality, we all know that it was an over-reliance on fossil fuels and a deregulation of an energy system that left them vulnerable to a perfect storm, pardon the pun, like this. So what can be done in either the education or communications or public advocacy space to fight back against narratives that powerful interests are running through their sympathetic politicians to change the reality of what actually happened?
So the fact of the matter is, okay, so I got to tell you a quick story too.
Please.
So it was my birthday yesterday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Well,
let's see some party emojis.
Let's just say, so there's gray hair here, right? And I don't quite look like the young lady that was in my picture on my driver's license, so I could not renew it online. And so I had to go in, right? Couldn't go in because guess what? The servers were down. Because guess where they're located? Texas.
Yep.
So, but to get to the answer to your question, polarizing politics is really hard to break through.
Right.
I mean, we've seen it. As we've seen different administrations come in, and we all know that the rhetoric has gotten worse. The divisiveness has certainly gotten worse. So I don't know that I have a clear answer on how to break through, all of that. But I think I've said, before, and I guess I just, you guys are the ones who can change things. Just like you can change things with your vote. The way to get politicians and policy to change is to talk to your lawmakers, because they will listen. And it's members, many of you, members of the business community. I mean, hop onto that zero emissions vehicle.
Right.
and talk money, talk economics, because that's something that does break through, that everybody has an interest in, right? So frame things in it from an economic viewpoint, because we all care about our collective success, right? I want businesses in this state and other states to thrive. So I'm going to hear that message as well as anybody else. So use your power.
That's incredibly good advice. And it's actually a wonderful segue to my next question here, which is about Colorado's uniquely, I'll just say, horrible fiscal constraints. So TABOR, the so-called Taxpayer Bill of Rights, is a piece of law that's been in our state constitution since 1992. The good people of Colorado in 1992 are very different than we all on this call now, and believed things that are, I think, are bearing out to prove ruinous for the state in many ways. What do you think TABOR and Colorado's other fiscal constraints, what role do you think they play in exacerbating or delaying the pursuit of our solutions to the climate crisis?
Okay.
Fair enough.
So luckily, people are, coming to really understand the impacts of TABOR, our Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And when I tell lawmakers in other states about TABOR, they're just like, huh? Because we're the only ones, of course, who have anything like this, right? So there's lots of different mechanisms that go into TABOR. We got rid of one this last election.
Right.
But my first year in the legislature, I served on committees can change, but I served on this one committee at that time. It was called Transportation and Energy. That's what it was called. And when we got around to doing the budget, which is our statutory duty, that's really what we're there to do, balance the state budget. I was just like shocked that there was I knew education funding was, there's a little, but actually education is a lot, but transportation was just like this.
Yeah, totally.
Little thing, right? And I remember that year, I think we were able to put I don't know how much money we were able to put into transportation funding, but it was just literally fill in a pothole or two.
Right. If I recall, it was about $200 million, which is a number that sounds big, but with our backlog is barely a drop in the bucket.
Exactly. Right. Transportation, I think it's the second biggest contributor to greenhouse gas, and then buildings, I think, which I can't remember actually. I think it's number 2. we've got a big transportation bill coming this year. We've been trying to fund transportation forever, right? So it's not just about filling potholes. Again, it's economics. Every state around us is funding their infrastructure. And, you know, we're going to get left out. I mean, the fact of the matter is you still have to move goods and services, right? Throughout the state. It's not just about you and me and our commute. It's about a lot of things, right? And it's about, that last mile. It's about, it's about buses. It's about bikes. It's about, other forms of mobility. So, so transportation funding Tabor has just hampered us in so many ways, but people are really starting to understand how it's hurt us, and are starting to come up with ways. I mean, it's in our state constitution. I don't know that we're ever going to get rid of Tabor, but people are trying to come up with creative ways to get the work done. But it's hard. It's hard as a lawmaker. Like I said, our statutory duty is to balance the budget. Pretty tough to do with Tabor.
Switching gears for a sec, there's a lively conversation going on here in the chat about what we sort of refer to as the continental divide or the urban-rural divide, where there is a perceived cultural gap of understanding and empathy gap between folks who live on the front range and in suburbs and near the cities in Colorado, and those who do live in rural Colorado, where we get our food from, where we get our energy from, where we get our water from. Can you talk a little bit about any ideas you have or any thought you've given to how to bridge the gaps and differences between urban and rural and suburban and exurban Colorado?
So, we hear a lot of this rhetoric in the state legislature about this rural urban divide. And we hear it from different sides of the aisle. And I'll tell you, I'm a Democrat. My rural Democratic colleagues are sort of like, excuse me, I'm from a rural area too. Like I said, it's rhetoric, right?
Right.
I don't know that there's truly a divide. I care, and I know that my colleagues care about, what's happening, on the Eastern Plains. This is our state. We are all in this together. So you might hear it and think that it's a real thing. I disagree. I don't.
That's interesting. I mean, I agree with you that I think it has been used as a tool for sort of polarization and partisan weaponization, that they're trying to divide us. And therefore, even though we do all share, one of the wonderful things about Colorado, and I can say this being a guy from New Jersey, is that there are a lot of values that are shared among Coloradans, regardless of where they live. We have a pride in place in this state that I think is extraordinary and unique, where a Coloradan on the Western Slope or a Coloradan in the Valley or a Coloradan in Denver all share the same pride for being in Colorado, for finding or living in or being born in this wonderful place. I do think that there are competing interests, of course, and when we have, two legislators in leadership, Danae Esgar, majority leader in the House, and then president of the Senate, Leora Garcia from Pueblo, you start to see a little bit of how some of those communities do feel like they've been left behind a little bit. But I do agree with you that it has been weaponized, I think, by opportunists in order to try and drive those divides further for, partisan political reasons. Speaking of folks who divide and conquer, the oil and gas industry in Colorado has been making claims that it supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in the state. Year after year, they've embarked on very fancy and sophisticated PR campaigns to buy billboards and knock on doors and put radio and TV ads up to convince everybody this is the case. They try and take credit for every, restaurant server in Weld County, for instance. While we know that they exaggerate their data, there are a number of communities who have become dependent on the revenue from oil and gas operations. So, as we begin our transition away from fossil fuels, if all does go according to plan, how can we ensure that the transition is one that retains workers and doesn't lead to these communities who may already feel attacked and left behind actually experiencing some real economic damage?
So look, it's a, you know, it's a real thing. I mean, as it relates to, people need libraries, people need fire departments, right? Um, but the fact of the matter is, and I think you all know this, any of you, who work in the who work in the oil and gas industry, um, the the money isn't there that used to be there. And we also know that things are changing. We have an administration that has put climate change on the front burner, as it were. We're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. And so, one of the things that we did a couple of sessions ago was create the Office of Just Transition, which specifically is helping our coal communities transition from those jobs as XL shuts down coal-fired power plants and whatnot. But there is some real concern from our union brothers and sisters and others that some of those jobs don't necessarily pay as well. So,
Right.
I mean, there's some realities, but the fact of the matter is that we have to set ourselves up in the state to take advantage. All right, of this move towards a more clean energy economy. And guess what? I have a bill. So you mentioned that I serve on the Colorado Workforce Development Council. So they do a thing where they look at different sectors, every year, and about where the job growth is and whatnot. And one of the things that I discovered was that there's this real disconnect in um, how clean energy jobs are being reported, curriculum offered in our community college systems, um, apprenticeships, entry points for concurrent enrollment for kids. I mean, all sorts of stuff as it relates to get it to making sure that our people, that Coloradans, actually get these jobs. And we're talking, I mean, we're going to electrify our entire infrastructure, right? We've got an entire automotive industry that's changing, right? We've got changes within our construction industry and buildings, right? I mean, there's just tons of opportunity. So anyway, and hey guys, if you want to help me on this bill, I'll take your help from the business community. Um, I'm running a bill, hopefully going to find some moolah that will help sort of build it. If you build it, they will come. That will create a better on-ramp, a better infrastructure to help promote uh, a clean energy economy and help move people into these jobs. And I'm particularly want to make sure that there's multiple entry points for people to sort of move into these various and sundry jobs within various industries. Um, I'm very concerned about particularly our frontline workers who've lost their jobs in this pandemic, right?
Yep.
And the data is telling us a lot of women, particularly a lot of women of color, right? So I'm working on the details of the bill. Any of you can reach out to me. I'm easy to find if you want to learn more about it, and maybe we can work together on it. So I could use your help. But so I'm trying to create a pipeline and infrastructure, as it were, to make sure that our workers are going to get these jobs. And to do so, I'm trying to come up with some pockets of money to better create these opportunities throughout our entire system. I know that's kind of long and convoluted, but that's
No,
right.
that's incredibly helpful. So I'll ask a little bit more about how we can get involved, but just a reminder for the crew here, we've got about 15 minutes left. This hour has flown by. If you have any questions for Representative Jackson, please do feel free to pop them in the chat. I have figured out how to walk and chew gum at the same time here, so I've got my eyeball on the conversation going on down there. If you have any other questions you'd like to address to Representative Jackson, please do feel free to put them in the chat. But while folks are contemplating those things, you talked a little bit about this, but I want to expand on it a bit further here if possible. If you have one lesson or one piece of advice to leave the members of this coalition, especially with how we can best support you and other lawmakers who are pursuing these economic, environmental, and climate justice policies, what can we do to best help?
So I don't think that people realize, I am forever grateful to all of you for joining and being part of this regenerative coalition. And that you saw the need for it and created it and joined hands. So I don't think people know about you, and I think they need to. So, um, uh, so I think that, like I said, talk to your individual lawmakers. Let them know of your business, whatever district or Senate district, House district, whatever. It doesn't matter where you are. If you know who those lawmakers are, your congressional delegation too. Don't forget about them. And let them know what your thoughts and your concerns are. Do whatever you need to do. Use social media, send an email, promote the heck out of the Alliance Center and the work that you guys are doing. Because your voices are different. They're not I don't think that they're the usual voices. I'm now seeing some of the stuff in the chat here about, we love rural Colorado. We create these jobs, and tell people.
Right.
So, and there's a multitude of ways to do that. And when we can all be together again, come down to the Capitol, because trust me, we're there day and night. So come on down to the Capitol, knock on a door and talk to people, because we are but regular people. We're not special. So.
Yeah, my wife is also a state senator, as you no doubt know. And she says, we're not special. We're just the ones who are crazy enough to do it. So yeah, and I say that a lot. The other fun reminder I had for lawmakers when I was a Capitol staffer, when they would, come to me at 7:30 at night and wondering when we were ever going to get off the floor, or will this interminable committee hearing ever end, was that I would remind them, and you know this all too well, Representative Jackson, that you literally go door to door begging for this job. So you've got to do it when it's time. Luckily, the culture of the Capitol has improved quite a bit, and I think that some of the COVID accommodations that have been made are generally really positive. You mentioned earlier that remote testimony has now been opened up to basically anybody, anywhere. That was something for a long time. You literally had to go to a community college and sit in a line somewhere if you wanted to testify remotely. But, we have these wonderful video chatting software, piece of software now, so we can all jump in there. Hunter asks in the chat here, will remote testimony be something that the legislature keeps after we're through this pandemic? Knocking on wood as I say that.
You know what? Certainly, I can't, make that decision. But we've always had remote testimony, but like Ian said, you'd have to drive to some community college and get in a room. We have the technology though, right?
Right.
We've made it work. I presented a bill remotely today, right? Moved amendments, did all that sort of stuff. So personally, I can't imagine that we wouldn't. And if you haven't heard me yet, hear me now. Let everybody and their brother know that you want this. Right. I believe everybody has a right to have their voices heard, no matter where they stand on an issue, right? And so, we have to hear from you. And anything that makes it easier to hear from people, we need to be doing. And so this is your legislature. You tell leadership, no matter who's in power, this is what you want.
I think that's a tangible next step for the coalition here. I see some folks having this conversation in the chat as well, where we can simply advocate for that equity piece to continue on past the pandemic. It's funny, you know, there's nothing magical about that building on 200 East Colfax. I mean, it's got a fun little roof and it's nice inside, but you can make laws anywhere in the state of Colorado. In fact, before there was a state capitol, it was done in a circle of wagons. Fun Colorado history fact. So I think we are actually through all of our questions and those in the chat. Rep Jackson, if you wouldn't mind just a couple wrap-up remarks, and then we'll let you get back to your committee hearing.
Okay, cool. Well, they're voting. So
Great timing.
It's okay. We don't need you right now.
Great timing.
So wrap-up remarks. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to every single one of you for spending time today, but for caring enough about your community to be here and to learn and to grow and to recognize your power and to be inclusive. So it's a beautiful thing. And so, and it's what this world needs a little bit more of. So that's really all I have to say is thank you to all of you.
No, thank you so much for being here, Representative Jackson, especially during a busy workday at the state legislature. We're incredibly grateful for your time. Before we let you go, I'm going to pass it back over to my friend Lisa Marie over here to end our little segment. I think she may have one more question. Thanks to the Alliance, thanks to the leadership and the RRC for inviting me and Representative Jackson to have this super fun conversation. Really interesting conversations happening about the conversation over here in the chat too. So there's a lot more work to do. Representative Jackson, thank you so much for your time today. This was really riveting. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. And hey, you got me out of the committee.
Tell them it was me too.
Thank you guys. I'm going to go. Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Jackson. So appreciative. Oh my gosh, Ian, that was riveting. And thankfully, this is being recorded and all the chat is being saved because like you said, there's conversations about the conversation in the chat. And one of them, and I just want to name some of them and some action coming out of it, right? So the Alliance Center now is willing to collect contact information and resources on how do we stay connected with our representatives so that we know that our voices are being heard. And how do we bridge divides? There are many divides, the urban, the rural, the political, so many. And what excites me is that the work groups exist. You know, let's work with what we have. We know we have an ally in Representative Jackson and many others. We know that we have the Alliance Center and all that it represents and exists and all its resources, and specifically the Regenerative Recovery Coalition and the work groups. At the end of our time today, we're going to have an optional happy hour. We can chat about this. There'll be the work groups available to go into breakout rooms if you want to be more specific. Linda Stopp asked one of the last questions is, how do we really, I'm going to paraphrase Linda, how do we really get the voices of the underserved, if I may use that word, the BIPOC communities and others, have their voices really heard by a representative, have their voices included in our work groups with the Recovery Coalition. And that's up to us. That's up to all of us. If we look even at the faces of who's here and who we represent, Linda mentioned that in the chat as well. How do we diversify the voices that are here? So all voices. So we're building back Colorado for all people, that works for all people now and well into the future. So we hope that you'll all stay a little longer to hear about what the work groups are doing, because that's what we're going to do next. And then stay for the happy hour so you can be part of the conversation and you don't have to stay on mute. So and again, hey, let's give it up for Ian. Is he amazing at being a moderator? Ian, I think this is one of your callings and it has served us greatly. So you're getting jazz hands and some other reactions. It was really outstanding. Fellow Jerseyite. So
thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Sure. We appreciate it.
I'm the least moderate moderator you'll ever meet though.
Yeah, but you know how to do it and keep it alive. So thank you so much. All right. So now, as well, I just want to say, as many of you know, that the Alliance Center hosted several emergent series conversations last year, and that resulted in a lot of ideas that need action. And so work groups were created in certain categories to take those ideas, sift through them, and put them into action. So we know policy is one of the facets of way that we can impact and change systems, like with Representative Jackson, and there are other ways. So these work groups are looking at multifaceted ways of impacting systems. So we're going to hear today from 4 of them: the Regenerative Agriculture Group, Shannon Bean, I'm sorry, I'm going to do my best. Scalise is going to give us about a 5-minute update on the regenerative agriculture. And again, if you have comments or questions, please put them in the chat, because we'll have a couple of minutes for Shannon to field those questions. Then we're going to hear from Julie Klein talking about circular economy. And then we're going to hear from Magenta Freeman talking about equity, access, and democracy. And Hunter Lovins with Bob Doyle are going to share more about the climate energy work group. So again, please put your comments and questions in the chat. Please say who you are addressing your question to, because we'll leave about 1 to 2 minutes after each of these presentations for you to be able to ask your questions. So please join me in a silent warm welcome or a reaction as Shannon Bean is going to, Scalise is going to share us an update of the Regenerative Agriculture Work Group.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank all of you for being here. And I encourage everybody to get active in the chat, because the meetings that I've been in where the chat is really active is actually where breakout conversations happen, and even conversations after the meeting that prove to be pretty darn fruitful. So don't be afraid to make friends. So kind of how I want to tackle breaking down what we've kind of started calling it food systems and regen ag. But I kind of want to walk through, we've had 4 meetings so far. And in those 4 meetings, it's really been an opportunity to get the lay of the land and kind of try to figure out, okay, well, what can we, as a relatively small group of people, like, where do we plug in? How do we fit? Where do we start? And so some pretty cool presentations we've had so far. We heard from Matt Berry at the National Western Center, and he and his team have actually assembled a 30-year food systems plan for how to stabilize Colorado food systems, and really have a very thorough map of all of the low-hanging fruit and where groups could start trying to solve problems and innovate and kind of rewire how our food system works. And then they've also called out what are longer-term initiatives that are more complicated that need more players. So we've kind of used that as a way to think about where we fit in the entire web, because it is a web. So we heard from Matt Berry on that. We heard from Colorado Collaborative for Healthy Soils, Helen Silver, and got a good lay of the land for what the state of Colorado soils are, where the efforts and intentions are around soil health. And then we also heard most recently from Anthony Mint of Zero Foodprint, which is a super exciting and innovative initiative to basically take a 1% on every restaurant ticket, ideally in all restaurants in the state, but currently it's all voluntary restaurants. So for example, you buy a $10 sandwich, you end up paying $10.10. That 10 cents actually goes to a program currently facilitated by Mad Ag to help get dollars to farmers and ranchers in order to invest in the infrastructure needed to sequester more carbon, which is super cool. So there's a lot of partnerships there. I think as we've evolved, and again, we've only had 4 meetings, so in some ways we're trying to get our legs under us and get a sense of direction together. But as these meetings have evolved, we've identified 3 side projects that we want to collaborate on and report back to the group about. And that's a food hub initiative as a way to address immediate impact and build trust through immediate action to people that immediately need food access. We have a Healthy Soils initiative, which is a longer term project. And then we have the Zero Foodprint support rollout, which that'll be kind of like a shorter term project. And so we're kind of starting to take a step back now that we have this shared sets of information to kind of figure out, how do we work together? What are intentions for our projects? What are our intentions as we have presenters? Because we don't want to become a group of a lot of Caucasian people on a screen that listen to people talk and unmute, like, think about how wouldn't it be great if the world was a better place. We want to kind of expand the tent and figure out how to build trust, because the work that we're talking about doing, which is really rewiring an economy and a way of relating to each other in all sectors, that requires trust. So we're kind of taking a step back. Next meeting with us will be a working meeting to figure out how to work together on these 3 initiatives: Food Hubs, Healthy Soil, and Zero Footprint. Anybody that is interested, we welcome you. If you know somebody that you think they would love to plug in, send them our way. The more voices, the better. And I think the value that I would like to impart to everybody, that actually Catherine Greener mentioned to me in a call recently, was trust the wisdom of the group. As we do this work, all of us are going to feel tensions. And I think if we make an intention to trust the wisdom of the group, that we'll be in a better spot.
Wow, Shannon, thank you. I just wrote that down as a quote, to trust the wisdom of the group. And, you know, with the inspiration on the chat to have conversations to bridge the divide, we should promote that as well. There's so much wisdom in the group. And there are a couple questions for you. So, yeah, you named a few resources, and people want to know how they can get a list of those resources you just mentioned, as well as can they come to the meetings, which if you would answer those for everybody, please.
So hex yes, you can come to the meetings. And then I can drop the link for the 30-year food systems map, which I describe as overwhelmingly awesome. It's a little overwhelming because it's a lot of information, but it's one of those things, especially if you're a data person, that you will totally nerd out to. So I will drop that in the chat, and then I will find the resources for the Colorado Collaborative for Healthy Soils, and I'll drop the Zero Footprint in the chat as well. Also, if you're not engaged in the Slack tool, it's a really great place to facilitate conversations and share resources. And if you're new to tech and Slack, think of it as an enhanced AOL Messenger. That's a really very, very enhanced.
That's great. So, and also Jeffrey, he put up a suggestion that a list of resources and programs would be really helpful. So maybe that's something that the work group can put out and the Alliance Center can promote. And Jim Venezuela is making a suggestion. It sounds like a breakout perhaps today during the happy hour. So everyone go to the chat and look at that suggestion about Pueblo Food Project as a secret sauce for ag, water, and soil stormwater runoff. So and other aspects there. So check that out in the chat, and we can make a space for you, a breakout today. And then last question here from Linda Stopp is, how is what you're doing in your work group different than what other groups are doing in regenerative ag? How is it similar or different, I'm going to add, that you're aware of?
That's a good question. I don't know how to answer that, except for to say that one of the things that we've identified is that there are a lot of people in this space, and there's a lot of overlap between different groups. I would say what's different about our people that show up is I'm sensing more of a drive towards action-oriented projects. So like, if you already have a ton of meetings of a bunch of people to talk, fantastic. If you want to get your hands dirty, and I really am an advocate of a 90-day project because it's short enough that it's not scary, but it's long enough that you have time to figure out if you love it. So yeah, I think I'm going to go with the answer is that we're intentional about being action-oriented, and we're intentional about listening, so that we're not perpetuating problems, but we're really trying to understand how the problems got to be and what a regenerative solution might look like.
Wow, thank you for that. And the more people that come to the meetings, the more wisdom in the room we can trust, right, Shannon? You're getting some great accolades in the chat. There's also a couple other questions about how to get involved that's being answered in the chat. So please join us and stick around for the happy hour. So let's give it up for Shannon. Thank you so much, Shannon. Give her some reactions, give her some love, and her passion. She's wearing her passion out in creating change with and for all of us. So now, if you would please join me in a warm welcome, maybe through a reaction, for Julie Klein. She's going to share with us about the Circular Economy Working Group. Julie?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. Very inspiring conversation so far. So the circular economy working group is framing a lot of its work around waste. But for those of you that have not really heard that terminology, in some, and a circular economy is restorative and regenerative. And we use that, obviously, that just those words a lot, excuse me, but sometimes they're not completely understood. So relative to waste, it employs the concepts of not only waste, but also reuse, recycling, and responsible manufacturing, which will support then, in the vein of what the work that we're doing here, the development of new industries and jobs, reducing emissions, and increasing efficient use of natural resources, which is, waste management takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of water, takes a lot of land. So it's an important piece of a regenerative economy. So our group is still doing a lot of information gathering as well, similar to Shannon's group, and I appreciated her comments about what that process looks like. Where we're coming from is Colorado. Many of you know this, but many of you may not. Is got a current recycling rate of about 16%. It's not ideal. It's not great. We have a lot of room for improvement. That's the silver lining part of it. The national average is somewhere around 35%. The good news is that Colorado in the last couple of years has really started to put a flag in the ground of starting to set a statewide goal. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to many other states in the country, but there's a lot of momentum happening, which is great. And that's a lot of discovery that's been happening with our group. We have an imperative, not only as a state, but as a nation and globally, arguably, to change the way that we look at waste. And I also am going to channel Catherine's comments as well. We need to move away from the take, make, use, waste approach to a borrow, make, use, return approach, which much of the work that was done by many of you that are probably on this call and other folks last summer during all the different convenings was to kind of raise up where this fits into the space of where we want to be as a state. And it wasn't necessarily, I understand, labeled as waste management or circular economy, but really when you package it all up, that's kind of what we're talking about here. As I said, that there's been some considerable momentum in the last couple of years, and having been in the waste management field a lot of my career, thankfully, we're getting some good momentum from CDPHE, from Recycle Colorado, formerly the Colorado Association for Recycling, EcoCycle, and many, many other organizations to kind of get some real goals and legislation and some resources allocated towards managing waste more proactively. So who's in our group? We have representatives from Recycle Colorado, from EcoCycle, elected officials, thought leaders, product reuse companies, recycled compostable product manufacturers, sustainable organic food representatives, entrepreneurs, large and small consumer product companies, concerned citizens, and NGOs. I would ask that everyone's in our working group, wave your hand, call yourself out. It's a great group of people and a lot of just very passionate people that want to make a difference in this space. We have also spent a bunch of our meetings to date on discovery, on the initial recommendations from the convenings last summer. Our work is around trying to create a shared understanding. The waste landscape can be pretty complicated. We all come at it from different perspectives, but many things have been heightened, especially during the pandemic relative to waste. And we already had a fair amount of things to address, and now we have many more with, keep trying to keep our economy vibrant, take out containers, all these other things. There's a lot of layers to it. As part of our kind of shared understanding and educational process, I want to thank the EcoCycle team. I know there's some folks on the call who have supported us with several presentations. The 3 things that came out of the work over the initial convenings of the Regenerative Recovery Coalition were to promote companies that will establish material reuse relative to packaging, plastics, textiles, and such. And that is being somewhat captured in legislation that's out, the Colorado Senate Bill 55. And we're trying to track that work and figure out, again, where we can intersect and support that work. And Another piece to that we got a presentation on was relative to plastics reduction. And that is being championed by several organizations. And it was somewhat introduced before COVID, and now is being reintroduced. And it's about plastic bags. It's about some packaging. It's about styrofoam. And we'll get you more information about that, because we're going to need, beyond our working group, some really good voices to echo Representative Jackson's call to action of, we need to let people know that this is important, and we want to pass in this legislation. The second item was research industries of the future and incentivize and recruit businesses to support a regenerative economy. It's kind of packaged with that first item. And some of the language that's associated with this that we'll also likely see some legislation on, or at least some significant policy work around, is called extended producer responsibility, or EPR. And again, EcoCycle folks and a lot of people are really getting behind this. The last piece, which I think will dovetail with some of the regenerative agriculture work, is promoting municipal composting operation for both urban and rural communities, and how can we be looking at food waste, which, is a big deal. We will take all the shared learning, and we're now at a point that with the addition of getting some more updates on kind of what's happening with the statewide composting council, is figure out where our priorities are and where our best work will be as a working group to support not only the policy work that's happening and the programmatic work that's being championed by, again, Colorado Department of Health and Environment, EcoCycle, Recycle Colorado, and many others, to find out where we can amplify that work and address gaps if possible. We have a really diverse working group, and I think that we have, a lot of ability to not distract from the work that's happening, but really figure out a place to bring in more stakeholders and increase the success of those initiatives. So.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. We have one question for sure in the chat. So if anybody has a specific question for Julie for now, you can put it in, or she may be willing to go to a breakout during the happy hour. But what makes this circular economy work group different than some of the other circular regenerative economy efforts out there? And how can people learn more about what circular economy and regenerative economy is all about?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that backwards. Okay. So I think that there's some great resources out there on circular economy, but I would say that and I just drew a blank as I started, the MacArthur Foundation has done probably the most leading work, and this is a lot of what they're focusing their resources on. So I don't know if Catherine Greener is willing to kind of throw in a link in the chat box for their main website. They do a lot of great work. I think this is one of many pieces when you look at the waste piece of a circular economy. And I would argue, and I would invite Catherine or anyone else to jump in as well, that much of this work that we're doing through the working groups and future working groups are key pieces of the circular economy. It's about efficiency. It's about regenerative thinking. It's about changing our paradigm, shifting our paradigm of business as usual, and thinking of ways that we create jobs, create equity, and look at the efficiency of use of resources. So I think that it can extend much further than waste.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I believe it was Tara or somebody may have had their hand up. If you do have your hand up for a question and you're able to go to the chat, please put in the chat. And it might also be that you were giving an applause or a thumbs up to someone and you hit the raise the hand button, which doesn't go down by itself. You have to go to reactions and put your hand down. But Tara, if you have a question or anybody else, please put it in the chat. Time for one more. And then again, Julie, there's several questions coming in. I encourage you to look at the chat and maybe go into a breakout during happy hour to talk about it. But could you talk a little bit about, how can I combine these? It's about, are you considering biodigesters as municipal composting systems? Is that something that this work group is focusing on at all?
Yeah, I don't think that we've gotten that specific yet. And as a matter of fact, I don't, and again, I would have somebody else jump in too. I don't think that we're probably going to get that tactical, but what I do know that there are several people on this call right now that are in the state composting advisory council. And I think that I would ask them to kind of capture that question and bring it into some of the work that they're doing at a state level. But I think that given different sizes of communities and resources, everyone's going to have to be open to looking at all sorts of solutions. So that's my 2 cents, working in the waste field quite a bit. So
yeah, thanks. And so any of you in the room today that can also answer these questions, please jump in. Of course, the concern about BIPOC communities embracing recycling and reuse of resources, and yet the way their consumption may need to be could make it difficult. So I guess I'm going to comment and say that these challenges that these work groups are taking on and the ideas are complex, very, very complex. And it's going to take all of us, wisdom in the groups, as Shannon shared, to be able to address these and move them into action. So we do hope that those of you that aren't already involved with the Alliance Center's Regenerative Recovery Coalition, please do join. We're going to end today with Hunter sharing a wrap up, and she may address some of these questions as well. But keep adding to the chat and we'll have our happy hour. Let's give it up for Julie. Thank you, Julie, so much for inspiring us with what your work group is doing. And I'd like now to invite you to join me in a warm welcome for Magenta Freeman, who's going to give us an update on the Equity, Access, and Democracy work group. Magenta?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was actually just grabbing the link to the presentation that I want to share real quick for folks as I speak to the Equity, Access, and Democracy group. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Okay. Yep. So Kelby can take care of that. So give you space to share your screen.
Okay.
Thanks, Kelby.
Awesome. Let me find this thing. I know it's here. Let's see. I see. You see my desktop, what you're seeing. Not sure where my presentation went, but guess what?
Yep. Well, and so what you might have to do is stop sharing. Oh, there we go. We're on target.
Yes, we're getting there. So give me just a second. Sorry about the technical difficulties here. And yeah, it's just slow in drawing because of the bandwidth. All right. So let me pull this up here. Can everyone see my screen yet?
I see it nice and full.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so my name is Magenta Freeman. My pronouns are she, they. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Equity, Access, and Democracy work group. And just want to give you an update on kind of what we've been up to. Oops, sorry, it's just getting ahead of me. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is what have we learned as the Equity, Access, and Democracy group, which I'm going to refer to as the AD because that's a mouthful. So forgive me for the acronym. So we've learned a few things. We've been meeting since December, and it's been a lot of time spending understanding what role we have in the coalition, because our focus is a little different, right, than folks who are focused on the circular economy we just talked about, or regenerative ag and food systems. There are very kind of tangible, objectives involved in that work, whereas we have a pretty unique role focusing on equity, access, democracy. Those are concepts, those are ideals, right? And so, not so easily wrapped up. So I wanted to speak to that. We also learned about the fact that we're doing very slow and challenging work, right? It's very interpersonal work. And so it requires us to approach it in certain ways. That may be different than work that we're used to doing. There are also, as what I think has already come up, many important voices that are absent from the coalition. And, one of the things that we want to be about is making sure that we address that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then there's a central need that has also come up much in the conversation today that we've also heard from the community as we've been having conversations. And so we want to talk about that as well. And I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. So, and like I said, I put the link to the presentation in the chat. So, in case I'm moving too fast or, you want to look at it later, you'll have access to that. So what we're saying here is that a lot of the, if not all of the other work groups are focused on these sort of tangible objectives that we want to meet in terms of bringing about a regenerative recovery. Our work group is definitely more relational. It's more focused on internal change as well as relational change. And so we really see our role as being a part integrated into the other groups and facilitating that work being completed using an equity lens, right? We want to make sure that equity stays at the forefront, like Catherine mentioned when she first introduced the idea. The other thing about it being slow and challenging, right? I'm type A, background in corporate America. I get that, like, we want checklists, we want things to be very, we're going to get this done and it's going to be like that. But this type of work, fostering equity, which equity is actually a facilitator of access and democracy, if we think about it that way, it requires us to be patient and to move at the speed of trust. What do I mean by that? That means that whoever we're dealing with, right, we have to gain their trust in order for them to hear us. We were talking in the chat about sort of the challenges between sort of the Front Range and the rural, different political ideations, those kind of things. It requires us to actually stop, listen, be slow about being relational so that we can reconnect with our humanity, right? Our common humanity, and begin to do this type of work. That the voices are missing, right? Rep Jackson definitely hit on this. We talked about Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Ken in the chat mentioned about the rural voices that may be missing. So we really want to make sure that this coalition is representative of the people, right? Representative of, who we are as Coloradans. And we want to make sure that the people who lack access and power to, for whatever reason, have a voice in this coalition. And so our role as this work group is to recruit those folks to come as much as we can, as well as represent those voices if they're not able to be here, right? Not everybody can, be on a Zoom meeting in the middle of the day. They have jobs. They have other responsibilities. So we want to be representative of those folks. The emerging common need. We saw a lot of people in the chat talking about, where can we find these resources? Can you put together, something for resources? That has been a theme over and over and over again in the conversations we've had with the folks in the community. The need for a hub, a database, some type of resource gathered for everyone to be able to access, so that we have a common understanding of who's out there doing the work. We're not being duplicative unnecessarily. We're, actually being able to have synergies and join together and get more done, right? So around the area of environmental justice and change that we're trying to bring, how can we somehow coalesce all this information? So that's something that we are seeing as a common need for everyone. So what comes next for this group? We plan to continue to participate in the other work groups, both the ones that are currently existing. We have folks who sit in on those groups. As new work groups are spun up, we plan on having folks from Equity, Access, and Democracy in those groups to be a part of those conversations. We want to continue to have conversations with frontline communities and other stakeholders, right? There are a lot of folks doing this work out there that we know are not here at the table. So we want to either be able to get a sense of what they are looking for, what they need, or get them to join us in this conversation, right? And then the other thing that we're planning to continue doing is supporting those immediate impact projects like Shannon was talking about, right? If we can have those 90-day or, even if they're longer term projects, just the idea that we want to bring impact to people who are in need and hurting at this time, right? We know COVID has exposed a lot of those needs. So we want to make sure that, we're not just talking heads, right? That we're not just doing the work of policy, but we're also doing the work of intervening for the most needy in our state. So what's our ask of the coalition? We just have a couple of really simple asks, I think, but not necessarily easy to do, right? First is we ask you to be open and supportive of the conversations that we are going to be bringing to these different aspects, right? To these different work groups. And we're going to ask you to consider, how is the equity and access and democracy represented in the actions that we're considering doing? And the other thing we're going to ask is, this is all an individual journey as well, as much as it is a journey of an entire group. So we just may ask you to just examine and look at your particular lens, right? And how can you, like a cameraman, how can you kind of adjust it so that it focuses on what actually is equitable, accessible, and democratic about what we're trying to do, about what's important to us. How can we bring those values to that work? Thank you very much. Glad to answer questions.
Ooh, Magenta. Wow. That was inspiring. And, the point of really ensuring equity stays at the forefront of everything that is happening, especially with this coalition. I'm seeing people nod their heads. You got a lot of accolades in the chat, is so important. And we are all change agents. Somebody just mentioned we have to start the change. And you know what? We're doing it. The fact that we're here, Magenta, you just said we have to focus. Focus is everything. Whatever we focus on grows.
Yes, right.
And so when we're focusing on equity and inclusion and democracy and access, and we keep asking ourselves the actionable questions, we are making that change. And it's such a needed aspect that your work group is collaborating with the other work groups to ensure equity stays in the forefront. So I didn't see any specific questions. I'm going to double check again, but I did see a lot of shout outs for the equity group from Shannon. Shout out for some of the most real and needed conversations I've ever had with other Coloradans. So way to go there. And well, here we have a question actually from Bob. Is how do you see your role, and I would assume the role of this work group, facilitating introductions between BIPOC communities and the Alliance and the Alliance's Regenerative Coalition and other work groups? How can we do that?
So I would address that by saying, this is a lot of what we are doing, right? We are having one-to-one conversations, and that's really how it happens, right? It's not some sort of grand, tricky thing to bring people in. We're human beings, and the way that we connect is one-to-one. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we're doing is having those conversations with people, right? Out in the community. We've connected with a lot of both BIPOC and non-BIPOC leaders in this area, right? And ask them, what do they think about these issues? Tell them about the coalition and see if they're interested in being a part of it. If they're not, asking them what can we bring to the forefront, and what would they, what questions do they have? It's just really being curious and being able to just connect to people as human beings. I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do in order to be representative of their concerns.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's conversation, right? Let's just connect with one another and really listen. So one more, especially for those that are already on work groups here in the Recovery Coalition, is how can the EAD group, as you called it, be heard in the other work groups? Is there more that could be done to cross-pollinate and ensure equity stays at the forefront of all of what we do in transforming systems?
Yeah, I guess, Linda, my focus has really been, like I said, our interpersonal connection. And so it's really important that we are a part of the conversations in these other work groups. It's really important that we get to know the other people in these work groups, that we sort of share and listen and understand their concerns and understand their objectives, right? That we really relate to each other. Yeah, speaking up and speaking out is very important. But, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a reason. Listening is really important. Asking questions, really important, because people need to feel heard. They need to feel understood. And if we just go at them saying, what they need to do and, how they need to do it and, what we have a problem with, that they won't hear us and they won't feel that heard. So that to me, it's as important to listen and to ask questions as it is to talk.
Thank you, Magenta. It's been an honor to listen to you and your inspiring words. So let's give Magenta jazz hands, shout out, reactions, some appreciation for her representing her work group. And now we're going to hear, so join me in a warm welcome with Hunter Lovins, and I believe Bob Doyle is going to join her to give us an update on the climate and energy work group. Hunter?
Lisa Marie, thank you so much. The energy group has gotten off to a somewhat slower start than some of the other groups. We had a person who had agreed to lead it. They had work challenges and had to step down. So just last week, Bob Doyle has agreed to take on the leadership of this group. Thank you, Bob. And Bob asked if I would give this report, but do please feel free to chime in if I miss anything. We live at a time in which the energy arena is changing incredibly rapidly. And I've just put into the chat box 2 papers that you might want to read. Rethinking Energy by Tony Seba and Rethinking Humanity, also by Tony Seba and James Arbib. Tony argues that in this decade, essentially everything about the energy landscape will change. And indeed, he argues for other core economic sectors, including materials. So this influences the circular economy work as well. That the fact is now, and this is pretty much universal around the world, renewable energy is cheaper everywhere than fossil energy. And this is partly why we're seeing the incredible destruction of jobs in the oil patch, 10,000 jobs lost during the pandemic in the oil patch. And even before the pandemic, they only supplied Colorado with about 40,000 jobs, 1/6 the number, for example, of outdoor industry. Climate. We are in a climate catastrophe. The 2013 floods, last year's fires, the enduring drought now facing Colorado, and of course, Colorado isn't alone in this. The polar vortex that hit Texas was caused by climate change, or as I like to call it, global weirding. It's colder, it's hotter, it's wetter, it's drier, it's weird. And it's happening, and it's us. We're the cause of it. We are also the solution to it. And so the climate and energy group, those 2 terms are combined because in many ways, how we deal with energy is half the solution to the climate crisis. Regenerative agriculture is, of course, the other half of the solution to the climate crisis. To the extent that we build healthy soil, that's based on taking carbon out of the air through plants and sequestering it in the soil. So as you're beginning to see all of these working groups fit together in an essential way, in our group, we've had a lot of issues confronting us. What's happening in the oil patch, the governor's climate roadmap that was mentioned earlier, which if you read, I mean, good on the governor and his crew for having a climate roadmap, but if you read it, it's essentially what will happen business as usual over the next decade. It is not a terribly ambitious plan. And so one of our group's members, 350.org, has done an excellent analysis of what needs to be done to strengthen that plan. And the coalition is now looking at whether or not we want to endorse the 350 position. Obviously, equity is key to everything that we're talking about. The underserved communities are underserved in every respect. They don't get the nutritious food that other communities get. They don't get the access to renewable energy, to electric vehicles, to transportation, to high-speed internet, to all of the services that some of us can take for granted. Some of us cannot take those for granted. And so it's essential that in this time of recovery, in which billions of dollars, trillions of dollars are going to be spent to try to rebuild the economy, we act rapidly. You know, Magenta said this takes time. Yeah, it takes time to get things right. And there are windows of opportunity that close, and then you've missed it. This next 6 months, this next year is one of those windows of opportunity in the economic recovery that we are all desperately hoping for as we emerge from this emergency of the pandemic. There are many other emergencies facing us. We're in a loss of biodiversity crisis globally here in Colorado. We're in an employment crisis. The latest numbers just out, Colorado is doing worst in employment, except for Hawaii, of all of the 50 states. And so money is going to be spent. Money is going to be found in the state budget. Rep. Jackson said, $3 billion deficit. And we are going to spend money. What are we going to spend it on? This is why we created the coalition, and it's what all of these working groups are working on. And with that, I'll just mention that we have engineers, we have scientists, we have people who work in various government agencies, people who represent activist NGOs, academics, and ordinary citizens, all coming together to talk about what's our energy future. And Bob, do you have anything that you want to add?
Thanks, Hunter. That was well done. Yeah, I'd just like to say, I think the power of our working group is really to leverage the knowledge and the influence of our working group members, the coalition members, the alliance in general, in the agenda that exists within the state legislature, the Air Quality Control Commission, and the governor's office, particularly. And we've been doing that to a limited degree. There's lots going on, and we'll continue to do that and get better at that. Having said that, our further challenge is to create an agenda which is more led by ourselves rather than just responding to these actors which are doing lots of things as we speak. So hopefully we'll get beyond just the reactionary and into the proactive, as I've heard from some of the other working groups, and we'll move forward in some very specific areas in the next few months. Thanks, Hunter.
Thanks so much, Bob and Hunter. I didn't see any specific questions, and I know that we're getting to the top of the hour, so if there's a specific question, please put it in the chat. There was a question for statistics. Hunter, you're always a wealth of knowledge in sharing those statistics so quickly, and I see some people responding to that. So if you'd look at that, Hunter, and add any more links that you might be able to do. So I just want to say a huge thank you for all our speakers today, especially Ian and Representative Jackson, for our work group leaders, Shannon, Julie, Magenta, and Hunter and Bob, and all of their colleagues on the work groups. And we hope that you'll get involved. So we have, as we close out, we would expect that you would have heard, and we can move the slides aside for a second so we could see people. We would expect that you've heard something today that has inspired you, and maybe even moved you to want to take action. So please answer this question in the chat. What did you hear today or experience today that inspires you to want to take action toward building and leading Colorado forward in a way that works for everyone now and well into the future? What have you learned and experienced today that inspires you to action? Please put it in the chat. Kelby's putting the question itself in the chat so that you can read it if you didn't hear everything that I just said. And then I'm going to turn it back to Hunter because she's going to share some ways that she knows that you can take action, and she will invite you, maybe for a whiskey over whiskey, on how to get involved. Hunter, all to you.
Thanks, Elisa Marie. Yeah, for those of you who can, stay with us as soon as the official portion has ended. I don't know about you, but I'm going to pour myself a whiskey and enjoy it with you. And we can chat about all of these issues. If there are folk who want to go into breakout rooms, we have those set up so you can do that as well. My plea to you is, if you are not already a member of a working group, please join one. We have 5 of them launched now. You've heard from 4 of them. The 5th is one on workforce development, which we've just barely launched, but which we will be kind of rebooting. And we have, as you've heard, energy, circular economy, equity, climate and energy, workforce. We're also going to have one on the built environment and on natural infrastructure. Natural infrastructure, the wild lands, the beauty of Colorado, clean air, clean water. These are truly Colorado's economic treasure, let alone our spiritual treasure. But these are what underpin the real economy of Colorado. What will be required to preserve them, enhance them? Policy. One of our members has already said we should have a working group just on the various bits of legislation and the policy. And then partnerships. How do we ensure that all of the entities in Colorado that need to be working together know about each other, are connected? Regenerative business. The Alliance Center has a program, Best for Colorado, which is pulling the best Colorado businesses together. We work with B-Lab. We've been in communication with Kim Kupinas, who is involved with B-Lab and the B Corporations. We can also launch working groups that interest you. If you haven't heard of one that I mentioned and you want to launch it, come talk to us. Again, the Slack channel is there to facilitate communication. You can also pick up the phone and call us. You can call the Alliance Center and they will get you in touch with us. You can go on the website at the Colorado Regenerative Recovery Coalition and get a hold of us. We'd love to talk to you. Several people ask, what's regenerative? And this is a question that is bedeviling not just those of you for whom this isn't a familiar term. It is now the hot buzzword. It's replacing the term sustainability, and you're hearing it used for all sorts of things. It's long been used for regenerative medicine, regenerative braking, regenerative marketing. Regenerative economy is the kind of economy that we all want to live in. It makes everything that we want better as it is dealing with the challenges that make life harder on all of us. It is at its heart an equitable economy. You cannot have a regenerative economy without justice, without equity. It's the kind of economy in which we would want to raise our children. It's an economy that creates high quality jobs through entrepreneurship. I've said that regenerative energy is everywhere cheaper than the extractive fossil energy. And you can begin to think of it in this dichotomy of extractive, in which you're taking something away, or regenerative, in which you are giving more to the situation. The Bible speaks of regeneration, describing it as renewal, a new birth, the changes that are produced by the return of spring. So I was tickled when in his State of the State announcement, Governor Polis said, Over the last year, we've faced a global pandemic, historic wildfires, and an unprecedented attack on our democracy. And now we have an opportunity for rebirth, for renewal, to rise from the ashes to fulfill the promise of a Colorado for all. Now, Jared and I have had this conversation in which I've urged him to declare Colorado a regenerative economy. And he hasn't quite gotten there yet, but he's getting mighty close. Spring's coming. Now is the time to emerge. Like sap rising, money is starting to flow. Money's going to come from the feds to the states. And as the days warm and the buds swell, action will be taken. What action do you want to see? This is a narrow window of opportunity. It is an obligation on us. And again, thanks, Shokai, for the remembrance of those we've lost and of the ancestral lands of the Native people on whom we stand. There is much we need to remember, but there is also much we need to do now. Now is the time to move from the past of extraction, of destruction, of degeneration, to build a finer future. This is the purpose of the coalition, and we can't do it without you. So please join us, join a working group, and let's build the Colorado that we want to live in. Thanks so much.